Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something totally fascinating. We're going to decode a master blueprint for building a genuinely spiritual society. You know, we live in an era of unprecedented connectivity, yet so many of us feel profoundly isolated. So how do we actually build deep, nourishing relationships? To answer that, we're unpacking a famous text from the ancient Eastern wisdom tradition, specifically text 4 of the Nectar of Instruction. We'll be looking at the 6 symptoms of loving exchange, treating it not just as lofty philosophy, but as a real step-by-step architectural plan for community.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the 6 symptoms of love, the power of association, awakening the heart, setting boundaries with bad company, and wrap up with a highly practical formula for giving. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. 6 Symptoms of Love. Building the Foundation.
We're starting right at the interpersonal core of our blueprint by looking at the exact actions needed to cultivate spiritual relationships. The source text uses this Sanskrit term prīti-lakṣaṇam, which basically translates to the symptoms of love. But here's the kicker. We aren't talking about abstract, warm and fuzzy feelings here. The text defines these symptoms as highly practical, reciprocal exchanges. In fact, the author points out that these exact same dynamics are absolutely necessary even in ordinary social or business activities if you want to forge a strong connection. Love is very much a verb here. It's all about what you actually do.
The author, Srila Rupa Goswami, actually lists out 6 specific activities, and it's kind of funny, he compares this whole dynamic to businessmen. Think about it. When one business person wants to make a massive deal with another, what do? They arrange a big feast, maybe at a fancy hotel. You know the drill, right? You wine and dine to sign the line. Over that meal, they openly express their intentions, they ask for advice, and sometimes presents are exchanged. It's a calculated method to establish real trust. The text argues that spiritual communities literally have to be nourished by these exact same 6 types of loving exchanges. So let's break them down into 3 distinct pairs.
Now, notice the heavy emphasis on reciprocity here. The first pair of actions is dadāti, which is giving charity or gifts, and pratigṛhṇāti, accepting gifts in return. It's a total mutual give and take of resources. You really can't just have one person constantly giving and the other just taking. That just builds resentment, not love. The text highlights that both individuals have to be willing to open their hands, generously contributing to one another and gracefully receiving what is offered.
The second pair focuses entirely on communication. Guhyam ākhyāti means revealing your mind in confidence, and purcchati is inquiring confidentially. This is where vulnerability comes in. According to the text, this often looks like an experienced devotee explaining confidential spiritual topics, while an inexperienced devotee learns by asking sincere questions. But that requires a safe space, right? You're opening your mind to understand the deepest realities of the material world and the spiritual path, and that requires a really profound level of mutual trust.
And the final pair centers on nourishment, bhojayate, offering prasāda, and bhuṅkte, accepting prasāda. If you aren't familiar, prasāda translates to mercy and refers to spiritual food that's been offered to the Supreme Lord. The text explains that feeding others and accepting these remnants of spiritual food are absolutely vital ways to maintain the spirit of devotion. Inviting pure-hearted people into your home and feeding them sumptuously isn't just basic hospitality, it's a profound spiritual exchange that bonds a whole community together.
Moving on to Section 2, the power of association, or who you keep close. So we've got the 6 exchanges down: gifts, communication, and food. Now we need to zoom out and understand why performing these specifically with other spiritually minded people is so incredibly critical. The crucial point is found in this principle cited from the Bhagavad Gita, Sangat sanjayate kama. It essentially means a person is known by their company, and our desires and ambitions are directly shaped by those we associate with. If you want to know what your future looks like, just look at the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your environment and your associations are literally the invisible architects of your desires.
Which brings up a super important question for this explainer. We know the 6 exchanges and we know association shapes our desires. So what actually happens when an ordinary person starts doing these 6 specific exchanges with advanced, spiritually minded devotees? What is the real impact of these interpersonal dynamics on someone's internal spiritual state?
The source text brings up this genuinely beautiful concept. This spiritual understanding, or Kṛṣṇa consciousness, is already innate inside every single living entity. It isn't some foreign, weird idea that you have to forcefully cram into your brain. It's already there. It's just sleeping. By simply reciprocating in these 6 ways, sharing food, exchanging gifts, and having deep conversations with spiritually advanced people, that dormant consciousness is naturally and completely revived.
All right, Section 3, Awakening the Heart and the transformative process behind it.
Let's look at how this transformation actually happens step by step internally, drawing from a source called the Caitanya Charitamrita. Step 1 is Shravanam Kirtanam, which means hearing and chanting the names of the divine. Step 2, through this sound vibration, the heart is cleansed of years and years of accumulated mundane dust and contamination. And finally, step 3, pure love naturally awakens. The text is super explicit here. This love is not gained from an external source. It's eternally established right there in the heart. The whole process is really just a matter of removing the dust so the mirror of the mind can finally reflect its true nature.
And this just goes to show the absolute sheer power of transcendental vibration. The text explains how this chanting wipes the heart clean, extinguishes the anxieties of conditional life, and actually increases this ocean of transcendental bliss. To prove how innate and powerful this really is, the text shares an amazing historical account. When the great saint, Lord Caitanya, was walking through the dense Junglearhanda forest, he was chanting with such unbelievable potency that the vibration affected everything around him. The text notes that even souls in lower species abandoned their natural biological animosity. Imagine tigers, snakes, and deer completely skipping the food chain to essentially host a peaceful dance party. The author's point is profound here. If sound can purify the consciousness of wild animals, just imagine what it can do for human society.
Which brings us to Section 4, Boundaries and Bad Company. How do we protect this process?
Because this spiritual awakening is so delicate and so easily influenced by our environment, the text draws a massive, protective boundary around who we should avoid. To protect this tiny seed of devotion, we get a really stark contrast. On one side, we have nourishing association, sharing spiritual food and having intimate conversations with those on the path. On the other side is toxic association. The text warns against intermingling with people who are actively opposed to theistic movements, referred to here as atheists, or those who believe the divine is strictly impersonal. The author uses this completely unforgettable metaphor to explain why you shouldn't try to force spiritual intimacy with those who are hostile to it. He says it's like feeding a snake milk and bananas. It doesn't satisfy the snake or make it your friend, it literally only increases its poison.
To stop us from soaking up that kind of materialistic or atheistic mentality, the negative injunction in this source is absolute. The text quotes a really stark warning. By eating food prepared by worldly people, one's mind becomes wicked. The whole idea is that consciousness literally transfers through food and through intimate exchanges. So, unless someone is incredibly advanced spiritually, they absolutely have to refrain from giving to or accepting intimate invitations from people who would drag their consciousness down. It's just a vital principle of spiritual self-preservation.
Finally, Section 5, the formula for giving. Let's get into the practical application.
So after outlining the exchanges, the internal transformation, and those necessary boundaries, the source material hands us a hyper-practical, individual application. We're going right back to that very first symptom of love, the dadāti or giving principle. The text provides an exact mathematical breakdown, which is literally a financial blueprint for an advanced practitioner. This was actually modeled by the author himself, Srila Rupa Goswami. When he decided to retire from his worldly duties, he distributed his life's earnings perfectly. 50% went straight to the service of the Lord and his devotees, 25% went to his family and relatives, and he kept 25% securely aside for personal emergencies.
Now, what you should take away from this isn't necessarily the strict math, but rather the principle of intentionality. The text makes it clear, whatever your income level happens to be, organizing your finances so that a significant portion, with the 50% rule being the ideal standard, is dedicated to spiritual causes grounds this ancient theology into an actionable daily practice. It moves the whole concept of love from a theoretical idea floating in your head into a tangible reality sitting in your bank account, completely fulfilling the demands of that first loving exchange, dadāti.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look at your own life through the lens of this spiritual blueprint. Think about those 6 exchanges, the gifts you give and receive, the conversations you're having, and the food you share. Are your daily exchanges actively nourishing your innate spiritual awakening by connecting you with uplifting company? Or are you spending your precious resources just feeding the snake? Something to think about.